lives. I was just at a Wings of Refuge 10-year birthday party yesterday, and we had 3 of the survivors share their testimonies. And it was amazing to hear them. These women came broken. From the world's point of view, they were considered worthless. They were considered lost. There was no hope. And yet, as those women spoke yesterday morning, you saw joy, you saw peace, you saw hope. And that came from not just what Wings of Refuge did, but because of their relationship with Jesus Christ. We have a wonderful God who will work through our troubles in our lives and give us salvation, but also healing. Which I think leads perfectly into our message this morning, which is eventually getting it right. And I love the Bible because the Bible keeps things real. You know, there's so often times when I have been in churches, I get this idea that unless you're perfect like me, you're not a good Christian. And the more I got to know those sort of people that thought they were perfect, I found out they were far from perfect. And I think at times when I read the Bible, I would look at the Bible characters and go, wow, those were some pretty impressive people. Sure wish I could be anything like them. But the reality is that we're all human beings. We're all flawed. We're all failed. And too often, we look at some of the pillars of the church and pillars of our history and the religion and note that they did so many great things. Last week we looked at David and some of the things that he did that failed. But it also does point to David's life that brought him into the eye of God and said, this is a man after my own heart. Because even when David fell, he knew enough to turn back to God. Today I want to look at a guy named Abraham, who started his life off as Abram. Abraham is one of the men who rightly deserves his place in the Hebrews 11 Hall of Fame, Faith Hall of Fame. Abraham was a man that literally is considered the father of the Jewish nation. He is considered the founder of the Jewish people. He is revered by Jews, by Muslims, and by Christians. That's an amazing feat for one man. And you know, sometimes when you look at Abraham and what he did, and when you see what he did to get him into Hebrews 11, you go, wow, that man was more than me. I never could measure up to that. But like I said, the Bible keeps it real, because the Bible will tell us of the times where Abram and Abraham, the same man, didn't get it right, when he didn't trust God as well. And it doesn't tell you this to diminish him. It doesn't say it to be critical of him. What it does is to say to you and me, you're going to fail. You're going to fall. That's not an if. It's a when. We all are human and we are all fallible. And occasionally when we fall, we sit there and go, well, I'm just not good enough. I'm just not worthy enough. I've fallen too far. God could never use me again. And God puts Abraham and David in the Bible and shows us their stumbling as well as their successes for a good reason. To remind you that if he can save Abraham and if he can save David, he can do the same for you and me. And that, my friends, is confidence that you can go to the bank with, because it is God's promise. I will deliver you. Our first scripture today is in Genesis 12, verses 10 through 20. And it says, so there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And when he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, and they will let you live. So say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. So when Abraham entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, and male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with a great plague because of Sarai, Abraham's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is it you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I may take her as my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go." And Pharaoh gave orders concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. Well, Abraham is not showing a great deal of faith there, but I got to give you some background so that you understand where Abraham was at when he went into Egypt. God had ordered Abram to leave the country that he was at. His home country was Ur, which would be very far south, and one of the very few Bible verses or towns that I can pronounce easily and spell easily, because it's only 2 letters. But he told him to get up and go to a land that he would show him. Abraham gathered up his family, which included his nephew and his father, and they went as far as Haran, which is just north of Ur, some, 100 miles or so. And they stopped. And not because God told them to stop, but it is the Jewish history that suggests that Abram's father was an idol maker. That was his trade. He made wooden idols. And it is very probable that Haran was about the northern limits where he could still sell his trade. And so his father was unwilling to go any further. And Abraham stayed there in Haran until his father's death. And then he moved on to Canaan. Now the Bible does not directly condemn this, but what we see is that by the time Abraham does get to the promised land, there's a famine. Which asks the point, if he had not stopped in Haran for the years that he stayed there, would he not have been established well enough to survive the famine on his own? The Bible doesn't clearly tell us, but it makes me wonder. And I will suggest to you that I would think Abraham was not using his faith power as much as he could. Once he goes into Egypt, and I have to say, you have to understand, we talk about Abraham and his wife Sarah. At this point, Sarah is 80 years old, and she's still considered an extremely beautiful woman. So I don't know what her health care looked like, but I'm sure the ladies would all love to know that. But Abraham is rightly afraid. I go into a strange land where I have no rights, no protection. They'll just kill me to get her. And it's very probable in society that he was going into that would in fact happen. But what it does tell me is that Abraham's not putting much trust in God. He's not saying, God, you're going to have to protect me because this could be dangerous. He was rightfully afraid. And he's only telling a half lie, I have to tell you. Sarah is, in fact, his half-sister. Now, this is later condemned by Jewish law. But in this time frame, early on, it was not uncommon. And in fact, was actually very common in many places. So he's only telling a half lie. But it's a lie that shows his lack of faith in God. And if that were the only time he did it, we could say, well, he had a slight lapse of faith, and maybe he shouldn't have done it, but, well, everybody blows it once. But if you go down from Genesis 12 to Genesis 20, we see Abram again fleeing to King Abimelech's kingdom. And unfortunately, he didn't learn his lesson in Egypt. And he does the same thing in Abimelech. He did not learn to trust God. And I will suggest to you that one of the reasons why Abram seems to be so willing to send his wife into foreign kings is because the land he came out of, Ur, was a very, very sinful place. In fact, every woman in Ur would have been required for a period of time to serve as a temple prostitute. You can see why God wanted them out of there. But you can also see where that may have had just a slight bent on Abraham. When they tell you that society around you can taint you as a Christian, be very certain that the society that you live in can very much affect your morals, your decisions, and what you consider right and wrong. God wanted him out of Ur so that he and his descendants did not have to face that kind of influence. But it is a situation where Abraham definitely has failed twice. He is very much allowing fear of man to override his trust in God. And like I said, sometimes when I look at Abraham from the chapter Hebrews 11 and see what great things he does, I want to say, geez, he was a bigger and better man than I am. I could never be like that. And I will tell you, it is not the Bible's reasoning to tell you what you can't do. It is not the Bible here to condemn these men for their failures. It is to show you that when they do eventually put their trust in God, God overcomes their fears, overcomes their circumstances, and does deliver them. We are encouraged to see how Abraham did blow it. And yet he did finally get it right. And make no mistake, Satan will always be there to tell you, yeah, those were great men, but you're not there. You could never do something like that. You could never be as good as those men. And that's a lie. A lie that Abraham heard, a lie that David heard, a lie that I hear every day, and a lie that you hear every day. Make no mistake, God desires us to grow in Him and become stronger in Him. And we see Abraham, as we read through Genesis, finally clicking, finally trusting God. And you've all heard of Abraham willingness to sacrifice his son. And for those of you who grew up with the Sunday school books, and I can't remember is it David Seuss Sunday school books that most of us probably grew up with, they always picture that story, and Isaac is always a little toddler or, young 8-10-year-old child. To tell you the truth, Abraham was 120 years old when that happened, and Isaac was some 20 years old. So he was not a father taking a mindless child out. He was a man taking an adult son and saying, we're going to go sacrifice to God. Tying him up, putting him on an altar before God stayed his hand. Genesis 22, 9 through 18 reads, when they came to the place which God had told him, Abraham built an altar and there laid the wood in order to, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on the top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he says, here I am. He said, do not lay a hand on your boy or do anything to him now that I know you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. And Abram went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abram called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on that mount the Lord shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abram a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars in the heaven and as the sands on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gates of the enemy, and his offspring shall all nations of the nation be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. What is happening here is God finally has Abraham's attention, and Abraham has God's focus. He firmly believes that if he sacrifices his son Isaac, that God has the ability to raise him from the dead. So he's willing to do what God calls him to do. And I will tell you that as you read different Bible scholars, there are many who believe that the mount that Abraham took Isaac up on is none other than the Mount Calvary. And there are theologians who will argue, and I love the picture, whether it's true or not I can't say, but it is possible that as Abraham is ready to sacrifice his son and is stopped, God gave him a vision and said some 3,000 years later, on this same mountain, my son will be put on a cross, and he will die for all. What you are willing to do, I will do. My son will die for the sins of the world. I don't have a biblical proof of that, but I love that vision. I love that idea that while this is a perfect picture of what is going to happen, very possibly on the same mountain, it is, in fact, what Jesus Christ would do for all of us. But it comes with a degree of learning. It comes with the fact that Abraham didn't get there on his first or his second try. Indeed, Abraham spent a lifetime. Like I said, at this point, he's 120 years old, which gives me hope because I'm only 67. So maybe God's going to have a little bit of time left to mess with me and get me straightened out. And believe me, there's plenty of straightening to be done yet. There's no question in my mind. You know, I love that bumper sticker. I haven't found it yet, but I've seen it on plenty of cars. It says, "Be patient, God's not done with me yet." That is the Christian attitude. We are a work in process. Like Abraham, we may very often fail. We may not pass the test. We may find ourselves fearing man more than we do God. But if we hold true to God, if we come back before Him and say, "Lord, I guess I messed up there," God is loving and faithful and caring and says, "I will take you from where you are and I will take you into a different place." When the Bible tells us about people like Abraham and David, it is not to shame us because we are so far from their examples. But it is a perfect example of showing us both their good and their bad. To say, "I know your nature. I know you are but dust. And because of that, I am patient and long-suffering. I will bring you into me if you are desirous to be there." When we are able, like Abraham, to trust God, to learn the lesson, to eventually get it right, we are able to see something that never was imagined before. I can tell you from my early history, and most of you know my past a little bit, but as a teenage boy, if someone had told me that I would someday be preaching from a pulpit, I would have laughed hysterically. This is the last place I would have expected to be. But here I am. And I'm here to tell you that it was not a quick, easy journey. And I think God took me through many paths to prepare me for this. Indeed, I can't think of any occupation I've ever had, including as a high school kid scooping manure, that didn't prepare me for ministry. Because there's occasionally times We have to scoop manure in ministry. When you're dealing with people, it just happens. I will tell you that when God delivered Abraham and made the promise he made to him, he was rewarding him for the faith that he showed. He was not punishing him for the lack of faith that he had shown so many times before, because, let's face it, Abraham did blow it. And like you and me, if you spend your life looking back and saying, well, I guess I blew that, I blew that, Satan will quickly convince you that you're never going to be anything but a failure. And my friends, I'm here to tell you that is a lie done by Satan. Every Christian should be like David, should be like Abraham. We want to strive to grow in our faith. We want to become closer to Jesus Christ. We need to remind ourselves that yes, you will stumble. It's not a win, or not an if, it's a win. You will stumble. And when you do, you recognize that and say, Lord, we need to get up from here and we need to go on. And I desire to not do that again. We have given hope from the Bible to watch Abraham, to watch David fail as frequently as they did and still be forgiven and still be elevated to the position that they are. God promises Abraham he will be the father of more people than there are stars in the heaven. And as far as I'm aware, even the greatest astronomers cannot tell you how many stars there are. It is amazing to me that the Jewish people call Abraham their father. The Muslim people call Abraham their father because of Ishmael. And we as Christians call Abraham our father because, as Paul says, we are saved by faith just as Abraham was saved by faith. So when you look at that, God's promise was upheld. How many people are Jewish, Christian, or Muslim? Over the period of years, I would say more than the stars. God has kept his promise, and he continues to keep his promise. He continues to reach out to us and say, you can do better. Not because you have to, not because you will earn a better place in my heart, but because I desire you to grow closer to me. And the closer I grow to God, and the more the relationship I build with God, the more healing I find, the more desirous I am to grow even closer. I was sharing with some of you earlier that I was at a Wings of Refuge event yesterday. We are 10 years old in that ministry. And 3 of our survivors shared their testimonies. And if you want to hear a powerful testimony, listen to a woman who was rescued out of human trafficking, who was told she has no value, no worth. Many were even branded like cattle by their pimps because they had that little value. To hear those women speak of coming from a world like that, to be given hope, to developing a relationship with Jesus Christ, and to be healed and made whole and to be restored to where they knew they were the valued children of God, that they could look anyone in the eye and know that God had forgiven them and they were just as good as any other person. Man, I'll tell you what, you can't sit and listen to someone talk like that and not have yourself go, wow. It moved you. It moved everyone present. It moved me. But it was that proof that God can and does change us. Too often we fear the change. I'm telling you, those ladies did not fear change. Yeah, they feared a lot of the parts of the change. There were some scary aspects. But God's change was good. It was healing. It was beautiful. Abraham, by the time that he was able to be willing to sacrifice Isaac was a man who trusted God more than he trusted himself. He knew that that God that loved him loved Isaac just as much. And so he was willing to say, whatever, Lord, I will do whatever. When I get to that point, and I would have to say I'm not there yet, but I want to be. When I get to that point of trusting God in that ability, I will have experienced a peace that nothing on this world will ever shake. You live in a world that's pretty messed up. You live in a world that's pretty scary. And I'm here to tell you, for good reason. I'm an old cop. When I see crime being done, when I see things going the way they are, it's good to be a little bit leery of this world. But I'm here to tell you, this world has nothing on our God. He can and he does still sit upon his throne, and he does protect his Christians. So we as Christians are called to grow in faith, to be cultivated, to grow further and farther than we can imagine. But the question I have for you, are you willing to be cultivated? Are you willing to grow? Thank you.